6th, 2018. Tonight's broadcast is one of my favorite subjects on one of my favorite books. It was given to me many years ago by a colleague who wanted me to share it with parents and consider it. And what threw me off was the title. In fact, two of my favorite books, the books that I recommend most to parents, have a title that on first glance doesn't make a lot of sense, doesn't necessarily bring you into it and bring you to a place that you think you're going to go to. One is The Dance of Anger by Harriet Lerner, especially the subtitle, because it talks about a woman's guide to intimacy. But once you understand the concept of the book, then the title makes perfect sense. And so it's one of my favorite books on boundaries. Tonight, I'm really going to take Harriet Lerner, Dr. Harriet Lerner's ideas and explore it. I'm going to give you the Reader's Digest version, as we used to say many years ago, version of the book to go through tonight and the concepts that come out of it. So first of all, I think a lot of people think of anger as something not to have. We talk about anger in our program with our clients as a secondary emotion, always covering up something else like fear or hurt or sadness or embarrassment. But if you delve a little bit deeper, you can find it. But from this perspective, it sometimes sounds like anger is not important and that we shouldn't feel it or pay attention to it. When on the contrary, it's true that we would be best served to pay attention to it and to learn to listen to what it is teaching us. And that's really what we're going to talk about tonight and draw out of Dr. Lerner's book. She says anger is a signal and one worth listening to. So that's where we start. It oftentimes, like I said, it covers up hurt. It exposes in us a lack of self-care, that our rights are not being respected by others in our life. It's a call to action sometimes. Our needs are not getting met. Somehow, some way, we're being taken advantage of or compromised. It can be that we're giving too much. And what's interesting about this particular concept, I often talk about that resentment, that's kind of a form of anger, is often a signal that we're not practicing good self-care, right? We expected to get back something from somebody. We expected somebody, this is really important, we expected somebody to do something for us that is really ours to do for ourselves, our boundary to keep for ourselves. Others doing too much for us, right? Requiring, asking for others doing a lot for us. And like I said, poor self-care. Anger preserves our integrity of self, right? It's one way that's a call to action for us to say, no, enough is enough. This is my boundary. I can't go any further. I'm not willing to do this. It can motivate us to say no. I think for a lot of families, it takes a while to get to a place with a child, and often that place is anger, where they're willing to send them away. Because prior to that, even though the child might be struggling, suffering immensely, that there's guilt or fear or other things in the way. And so for a lot of our parents, it has to get to a point of anger. I always get curious, what happens when the anger goes away? Can we maintain our boundaries in our course after the anger is gone? So it helps us, anger can motivate us to set a boundary for ourselves. It gives us permission to take care of our own needs. We can defend ourselves from others that are chronic violators of our boundaries, from predators in our life. Anger just is, right? It's not, I think one of the things that I hear misunderstood in our culture is that we choose our feelings, when in reality we don't. We don't have an experience of choosing our feelings. They're ours to own, but it's not a conscious choice the way you would select a menu item at a restaurant for dinner. And it's not behavior. I think what happens for a lot of people is because they conflate anger with behavior, they think they're getting a consequence for their emotion. When I work with men who are convicted of domestic violence in the state of California, they often talked in the beginning stages of their treatment as wanting to learn to control their anger, wanting not to be angry because they couldn't separate out the emotion from the behavior. And what I would teach them, what I teach our students, our clients, is Anger just is. It's just a feeling. You're not in trouble for being angry. You're in trouble for punching somebody in the nose. That's what you're getting this consequence for. That's what the reaction is about. In some cases, of course, we do get punished for our feelings. In some families, it's not okay to be angry, especially at parents. So for some people, anger is intolerable. It's scary. It's overwhelming. Um, Knowing what we feel is a skill to develop. If I were to oversimplify what therapy is, what our program is, it's teaching how people how to feel. And really, we do that by talking, by asking questions, by asking them to check in, to share many times a day how they're feeling. And they come away knowing what's underneath their behavior, knowing what's underneath the behavior of others, right? They learn to develop the feeling muscle. We learn to fear our own anger, not only because it brings about the disapproval of others, but also because it signals the necessity of change. Anger can be scary for a lot of us. Some families don't do it well. Some parents weren't brought up where anger was okay. The question becomes oftentimes, sometimes parents want to decide their child's feelings for them, right? They'll say things like, he doesn't have a right to be angry. Others have it so much worse. And the thing about that is we don't get to decide how somebody feels. When we think that we do, we try to dismiss it, explain it out of them. We might outright use shame to try to get them to not feel it. I shared this with somebody just recently that I saw a quote somewhere that said, telling somebody they shouldn't be upset because other people have it worse is about as smart as telling somebody they shouldn't be happy because other people have it better. We would never think of doing that. And yet when people are angry, we often try to talk them out of it. We try to explain it out of them because it scares us. It's frightening. Some people don't want to feel angry because if you compare anger to thirst, I can't get a drink of water right now. I can't make it go away. So why feel it? What's the use? What's the utilitarian value of it? So how can we use anger? How can it transform us? How can it be helpful to us? We can learn to turn into the true sources, Dr. Lerner says, of anger and clarify where we stand. It can start to signal to us what's important to us, what we value. I'm going to talk a little bit later about the fact that that's not enough, right? It's not enough just to be angry about something. It is, like Dr. Lerner says, a signal for us to do some work. We can learn to use healthy communication skills with others, to have a better chance of being heard, of communicating. We can learn to observe and interrupt non-productive patterns of interaction, changing our part of the dance. That's really what this book is about. But a lot of times, chronic anger and resentment are because we're not willing to change. I hear all the time people say things like, he can't talk to me that way. He can't treat me that way. She can't say that to me. She can't do that. And my response, often in my head, if not out loud, is yes, they can. They can do anything they want, really. What you're really saying is you wish they wouldn't. And we do so much in our relationships to try to get somebody to change. Because if we can get them to change, whether it be our children, our spouses, then we don't have to set a boundary, which is a frightening and difficult thing to do for most of us. It's important to learn, this is really critical. I'm going to spend a moment on this. It's important to learn how to respond to counter moves or change back energy. And I'll say it this simply. If you make healthy changes in your life, your loved ones, your family, your friends, even those that have the best of intentions, will oftentimes be uncomfortable with the change. They'll ask you to change back. It might be through guilting, it might be through a threat of abandonment or disapproval. And so it's important for us to learn, if I set this boundary, if I make this change in my life, what might my mother, father, husband, wife, son, or daughter say to try to get me to change? It's one of the reasons why I ask parents to write a letter at some point, often, that says, here's how to best manipulate me, right? To name it. To name it, put it out there, even give it to your child, so that everybody understands the vulnerabilities that they have. And when we name them, when we identify them, they become less powerful for us. So anticipate and plan for and consider a response ahead of time when people tell you to change back. Questions to ask yourself, Dr. Lerner says, what am I angry about? What's the problem? Whose problem is it? A lot of times, like I said, we want to make it their problem. And it's easy for all of us, isn't it? It's easy for us to focus on somebody else changing rather than focusing on ourselves changing. I learned about the time I was reading this book that I didn't lack clarity in a lot of my relationship choices. What I lacked was the courage to be able to do it. I lacked the ability to step into my truth because of the fear of what might happen, of things that I couldn't control. How can I express my anger in a way that won't leave me feeling powerless, right? Part of what I try to do with parents is empower you to step into your truth and that it's okay. I often say you can't choose how to lose. Excuse me, you can't win, but you can choose how to lose. It frees you up to express your truth, to set your boundary. And if you're easily moved off of your spot, off of your ground, because of the threat or response of a child, in essence, you reinforce kind of whatever that technique is. How can I communicate without becoming defensive or attacking? I love that she talks about this in one way in her book. She talks about the obnoxious stage of therapy. I talk about this with clients all the time. That early on, when people are starting to make changes, starting to go to therapy, they're obnoxious about it. And she says it in a way to kind of normalize it, and so you can be soft on yourself, easy on yourself, and know that you're not going to get it right. But we can learn to communicate. Oftentimes it's abrupt in the beginning stages. Oftentimes it's about attacking the other person instead of calmly, peacefully, with serenity and clarity, stating your truth, stating what you need, stating your boundary, without the need to make the other person be the bad one. What risk and losses might I face if I become clearer and more assertive? You know, I think it's a really important point for everybody in the family to look at. Really valuable. If there were no losses to change, change would be easy. All of us would be enlightened, right? We would all be perfectly not codependent. We wouldn't be suffering with the anxiety, the discouragement that we suffer with. So somehow our lack of clarity, somehow our lack of assertiveness serves us, protects us from things that we think are going to hurt us. And we're convinced that if we set our boundary, that the worst possible outcomes are going to happen. It's important to identify that, she says. Is it working? What can I do differently? Is me being angry that my spouse won't change, that my son won't change, that my daughter won't change, is that helping in this process? If our goal, she says, is to break a pattern in an important relationship, and or to develop a stronger sense of self, it's essential that we learn to translate our anger into clear, non-blaming statements about our own self. I remember, and I've told this story many times, about my son years ago. He borrowed a painting that he had painted for us that stood in a prominent part of our house. It was a beautiful painting. It was a gift that he gave to us. And he asked if he could borrow it for an art show. And we said, sure, of course. And we were moving. We were selling our house at the time, and we were having a showing come up. And as the showing got closer, he still hadn't returned the painting. And I called him and asked for the painting back. And it's a very large painting. And so he told me why he couldn't get it back. He didn't have the right car. His friend's car that he borrowed to get it, he's out of town. And I hung up the phone, felt resentful, felt taken advantage of. I'd given him many chances. I started to go to the place of all the things that I've done for him, how I support him. I remember sitting on the rim of the bathtub in my bathroom, talking to my wife about it as she was getting ready in the morning, describing my resentment. And I was thinking about this book, and I realized, wait, this is a me problem. This is my problem. My clarity was about me. So I got up, I went in and called him, and I said, I need it back by tonight at 7. If you don't do it, I'm going to drive down to your house, about 45 minutes away, hour and a half round trip, and I'm going to get it myself. And he hung up abruptly, not happy about it. Right? I had to start to deal with the change back. In a couple of hours, he drove up to our house, opened the front door, walked in with the painting, hung it up on the wall, walked out without saying a word to me. And I thought, that's about right. That's about what I was afraid of. And a day later, we didn't talk about it. But I was held hostage by my own fears of rejection, of that I would upset him, that he would be angry with me. And that's a very small example, but it illustrates larger examples in our lives that we're afraid, what we're afraid of. If we step into our truth, assert ourselves, state a boundary, require it of other people. Blaming versus assertive claiming. Everybody has a right to their opinion. Don't try to change the other. You know, one of the most elemental measures that I'm taking when I'm listening to a family is, does everybody have a right to their feelings, to themselves, to their thoughts, to their ideas? It's hard for us as parents because if we can change our child's mind, then again, we don't have to do the work of boundaries. We don't have to follow through. And follow through sometimes is hard for a lot of reasons. It takes energy, it's inconvenient, and we're afraid of the emotional punishment and backlash. So we get worried, we get anxious when our children express ideas, opinions, thoughts, feelings, and beliefs that are going to lead us down a road that we're afraid of. Right? We have to insert ourselves into it. We have to change the mind so we don't get to that place. So I listen a lot to this idea. Clients and students will tell us often after their experience at Evoke, it was one of the easiest and freest places they've ever lived in their lives. Not because the rules and the structure isn't significant, and being outdoors 24/7 for weeks on end isn't difficult and trying. But when I ask follow-up questions, the answer is because I could feel and think what I wanted. There were lots of structure, lots of rules, lots of consequences, but I didn't have to feel or think a certain thing. And again, that's one of the great challenges in our families. It's a great challenge for me as a father, whereas it's not a great challenge for me as a therapist. I'm not tied to, attached to what my clients feel and think. I am tied to and attached to what my children feel and think because I'm going to pay for that at some point. We use I statements instead of you statements. I talk about this all the time with families. Talk about boundaries in terms of what you need to feel okay. You're going to assert, take care of yourself. People often ask me, what's the difference between setting up a boundary to take care of yourself and asking your child to take care of you? Well, it's the who's doing the taking care of. I'm going to do this for me. Not I'm going to do this for you or for your own good or so that you learn a lesson. Those come with it. But I'm going to do it for me. And although they will resist us, our family, our loved ones will resist us in the short run. Our children, more specifically, will be grateful that we're taking care of ourselves. It'll be a relief for them. We will be safer for them when we take better care of ourselves. Don't try to get others to agree or like it. She starts off, and I'm going to share about a couple where a wife says that her husband forbade her from going to a lecture of Dr. Lerner's, and how she everything in the world to try to get her husband to change his mind, except for just asserting herself and doing what she needed to do for herself. And lastly, owning our problem. Right? This is ours. Anger is something for us to work on. It's something for us to, it signals for us that we need to make a change in our relationships and our boundaries, how we operate with others. Like I said, the early story is about Barbara. She submits to unfair circumstances, right? She goes along with her husband putting his foot down that you're not going to go listen to some feminist speaker and mess up what we got going here. She feels powerless, like she's not in control of her life. She has not effectively addressed the real issue at hand, which is her submission to this process. She sacrifices her own growth to bolster and protect her husband. She preserves the status quo in her marriage at the expense of her own self. There's a quote in my book that I borrowed from Wicked, the musical. And she basically says that, Alphabet says that in that musical. She says, if I have to be what you need me to be accepted, it's much too high of a cost for me. She avoids testing how much flexibility in her marriage has to tolerate change on her part. I felt that in my marriage. That was in what my wife and I call marriage 1.0. That was really what I was doing. Wasn't speaking my truth, trying to protect her, to protect the marriage, not be rejected, not make waves. And when we went through what we went through, we were both amazed at how much our marriage could tolerate. And it was terrifying. I was sure we weren't going to survive it, and we did. Barbara feels hopeless and powerless. She turns her anger into tears. She gets a headache. She does not like herself, and she believes that she behaved badly in the end. Because all she did is fight with her husband, argue with him, yell at him, debate with him, nag him, beg him, plead with him, try to guilt him. All these things are substitutes for boundaries. Those are all the things that we all get caught up in doing with our children, with our loved ones. We do everything short of setting a boundary. Dr. Lerner talks about the nice guy syndrome. We keep it to ourselves and we avoid making clear statements about what we think and feel. I see husbands and wives do this with themselves, do this with each other all the time. And they think they're doing somebody a great service by pleasing, placating, by saying yes, because they'd rather feel angry than guilty. And there's this dance that they do, right? I share this story because it was one time that we got it right, both of us. It doesn't we don't always get it right, but it illustrates what it looks like when it works, so that we understand what it looks like when it doesn't work. It was a Saturday, and I just finished running an intensive. I was actually standing right over there by the window, talking on the phone, finishing up my week's work, so that I could have the rest of the weekend off. And my wife walked into my office and she said, "Hey, I'd like to talk right now. I know you've been working all week and into the weekend, and if you can't do it, that's okay. I can talk to my friend or do something else, but if you can, I'd love you to do it." And I thought to myself, I want to say yes. I don't want to deal with the guilt of I'm working too much and then I don't have anything left over. I don't want to have that fight where I'm not a good husband and I'm putting my clients as a priority over my family. And if I could just be there for my family and not for the clients, it'd be better, so forth and so on. So, but I heard something and felt something, and I thought, I'm just going to try telling the truth. And I just said, I can't. I'd rather not. And my wife said, I totally understand. That's great. And she walked out of the room. I was so happy for both of us. Because what it would normally look like is what I described, right? I would either say yes and be resentful and be drained. That would lead to something coming out at some time, leaking or coming out sideways. Or I would say no, and then we would have this debate, argument about what kind of husband I was, what kind of father I would be. And I was proud of myself for stating my truth. That's my part of the equation. And I was grateful for my wife, for her being clear with her boundaries, asking for it, and realizing that I couldn't give it, and it didn't make me a bad husband. It just made me a human husband, and that she could take care of herself somewhere else. We lose clarity of ourselves when we try to be something we're not. There are three risks involved, as she says. We assume we're on responsibility for other people's feelings and reactions, right? We become good managers of other people. We relinquish our primary responsibility to proceed with our own growth and ensure the quality of our own lives. We abdicate it to others. This is essentially codependency. I'm going to get my needs met through you instead of the courageous, absolutely terrifying task of getting them met for myself. I saw a video recently with Will Smith. I think I've shared this on a broadcast before, but it was powerful. A friend sent it to me. Will Smith is not where I usually go to get my wisdom, but he said I might like it. And he talked about how he and his wife, Jada Pinkett Smith, about how early on in their marriage, they thought it was their job to make the other person happy. Like Will's job to make his wife happy and vice versa. He said they got up to a point in their marriage where they realized it was their job to get happy and come to the marriage happy. Right? And that's a different way of thinking about it. With our children, we don't talk about it in terms of making them happy, but we think about it in terms of serenity. It's my child's job to give me serenity. They have to stop being depressed or using drugs or acting out or whatever it is so that I feel okay, so I can sleep at night, so I feel peaceful. When in reality, it's our job to go take care of that, to go get those needs met. So that when I come to the relationship with my child, I'm there for them. That's essentially what this book is about. It's not about finding female intimacy. It's about learning to show up. Where we take care of ourselves, which is frightening to do, and then to be there for other people as we can be. We behave as if having a relationship is more important than having a self. Right? There's so much on that now in our culture and our literature about how we're recognizing that being a self is our primary responsibility. It's the first ingredient in intimacy. You know, the boys asked me, and I was out in the field this week, and some of the boys found out that I was one of the founders of our programs, created our program, and they asked me, well, why do you do this? Why did you create this? Why separate families? And my answer was, we're trying to heal people. And we start with all of you individually, and the time and the space that gets created provides an opportunity for everybody to get healed and grounded to know themselves. This pace of letter writing therapy is like a walkthrough, right? It's slow and it allows for awareness. We get out of the kind of real-time trigger reaction with each other, the pinball, the ping pong back and forth. And we start to develop our truth. And that then becomes the ingredient, the starting point, the jumping off point for intimacy, for connection. So we're really working on connection, the early stages of it, which are about everybody in the family finding themselves. Dr. Lerner talks about de-selfing. Too much of oneself, including one's thoughts, wants, beliefs, and ambitions, is negotiable under pressures from the relationship, right? Every relationship. While this is a book written to women about their intimate relationships, it really is just written to human beings about what it means to be a self and how we're willing to get rid of that out of a fear or a threat of losing a relationship. She talks about the under-functioning, over-functioning dynamic. We're actually colluding with others in our lives for them to maintain the same behaviors that they maintain. I had students share that with me today. He said, I was thinking that I was going to get a bad reaction from my father this week. I thought my dad was going to get mad at my letter. And he said, and he wasn't. And he said, I realized when I got a letter from my dad that was patient, understanding, compassionate, and empathic, I realized that I was expecting him to get mad. I was actually kind of wanting him to get mad so I could justify my anger at him. So we do so much in relationships to inadvertently reinforce the things that we want to see change. This can happen in terms of our emotions. One person feels all the feelings, our limits and our boundaries. One person does all of that work, the other person does very little. The nurturing and connection, again, one does a lot of it, the other does very little. Or even worrying. Sometimes there's not enough room for two people to worry in a relationship because one is doing so much of it. Dr. Lerner's version of what I call in my book, idiot parenting. When we use our anger to make statements about the self, we assume a position of strength because no one can argue with our own thoughts and feelings. They may try, but in response, we need not provide logical arguments in our defense. Instead, we can simply say, well, it may seem crazy or irrational to you, but this is the way that I see it. And this goes for everybody in the family. Right? I had a parent say to me today, I think I'm making the mistake of approaching my child with rational, logical thought. And I said, absolutely. Right on. That's exactly the mistake that you're making. My therapist said one time to me, in order to understand somebody, you have to lose your mind. Right? You have to see the world from their unique perspective, which often has in it emotions and ideas that aren't rational, except for in their very unique context. So when we grow up in a family, when we develop a family where people, it's not about being right or rational or good, but about being people, it changes everything. We equip our children when we raise them in a family more like that, we equip them to go out in the world and to be a strong self, to be okay, to not be held hostage by others. I love the story of the New York City bus driver. The three women on vacation in New York City, getting on the bus, and the bus driver yells at them very quickly and tells them to get to the back of the bus and sit down because he's got to make his route. And they have three separate reactions. One is very depressed, feels beaten down by it. One is angry at the bus driver. And one wants to take a picture of the bus driver because she thinks it's classic New York City personality coming in. Same behavior, three different responses that tell us a lot about the individual women and nothing about the bus driver. So we take ownership for ourselves. We don't say things like, you make me angry, you make me scared, you make me miserable. We feel certain ways and then we take responsibility for changing it. It changes the desire. We put our energy into taking responsibility for other people's feelings, thoughts, and behaviors, and hand over to others responsibility for our own. That's why we like you statements better. It's much, much easier for me to talk about what a jerk my wife is being tonight than it is for me to own my feelings and what I need to do in it. I could talk all day about other people's problems. But talking about what I need to do to change, that's terrifying. Avoiding the cause and effect relationship, thinking in relationships, this idea that others are causing something. And reasoning with our children, right? We think we enlightened parents as we see ourselves, evolved parents as we see ourselves. We aspire to reason. We think reason with our children is the highest form. It sounds like an enlightened thing to do, but usually it boils down to trying to get them to see it our way, to justify our behaviors, to explain away their feelings. If you could just see it my way, you wouldn't be upset, right? That's what they hear. Don't feel, don't think the way you think. We want our kids to want to change, right? Because again, if they want it, we don't have to do some of this hard work. There's 3 steps that she talks about. We listen and empathize. We avoid advice, reassurance, criticism, interpretation, or instruction. We just listen. We provide a container. You don't have to counter it. You make your own decision regardless of the child's emotionality, rather than giving in and blaming the kid for always getting their way and being manipulative. I talk about this all the time. Being manipulative is it's not an indictment of the child. It's a revelation of where you're vulnerable. Some children are more gifted in the art, for sure. But really, it's more about you than it is about them. Take responsibility for setting clear rules and enforcing them. That's our responsibility. It's why I always talk about the real work. The real work is your recovery, for your issues, for your codependency. That's the real work to focus on. Make that the project. Instead of thinking about kind of planning for their relapse, talk about your relapse. Make that part of the culture in your life, in your families. What are you doing? What do you need to work on? What are your triggers? What are your hot spots, your vulnerabilities? Anger and guilt are almost incompatible, excuse me. But it's one or the other. I learned from her book that guilt, this is when it really became crystal clear to me, that guilt was a force in our lives that prevents us from doing the right thing in most cases. It does not encourage us to do the right thing. It prevents us from doing it. Try to gain the courage to stop feeling guilty and begin to use our anger to question and define what is right and appropriate in our lives, right? Guilt, which most therapists, psychologists, self-help writers will say is a sense of feeling bad about what you did. Not really. It's the misunderstanding, the erroneous belief that when somebody's upset or hurt or sad or discouraged or mad, that we did something wrong, right? It's our belief that if we do step into our truth, assert ourselves, demand what we need for ourselves, and other people are upset about it, that we're wired to think that something bad about that. Most parents that I talk to have to learn to tolerate guilt in order to do healthier self-care, assertive communication and boundaries, right? To do the right thing, they have to learn to feel and tolerate that guilt. Notice guilt-inducing tactics when we start expressing our anger appropriately. Just be ready for that change back energy. Being told that you are selfish, immature, egocentric, rebellious, neurotic, irresponsible, ungiving, cold, etc. Right? Those are the kinds of things that we are told and we tell other people when they start to take care of themselves. Counter moves are what she calls change back energy. Anticipate them. Know what your vulnerabilities are. Behavior will likely escalate. It doesn't go away immediately. It actually gets worse initially. Hit and run doesn't work. We summon up the courage to set a healthy boundary. We set the boundary, and then we think, oh, I'm glad I don't have to do that anymore. I really faced a dragon, a ghost in my life. And you did. But unfortunately, you're going to have to do it another 100 times for it to sink in. It doesn't work to do kind of a hit and run. Independence, she says, means that we clearly define ourselves on emotionally important issues, but it does not mean emotional distance. It will feel like emotional distance. It will feel like uncaring. I remember telling a mother, when you start to practice more regularly healthy boundaries with your child, it will feel to you like abandonment and distance. No matter how your daughter reacts. And most likely she'll accuse you of that, by the way. And both things came true. You know, I worked with his mother for a while, and she came to me at one point having set some difficult, courageous boundaries with her child, not responding, not reacting in the old ways. And she felt absolutely miserable. In the story about a woman setting a new boundary with her mother, Dr. Lerner says, be prepared for attack, withdrawal, threaten, and do her old thing. Notice these patterns in letters from children to parents at Evoke. She calls these tests, right? That's the kind of change back energy. I love the story of a mother with an aging father, the father asking this mother to do more and more. She has her own family, her own needs, and she gets to a point where she realizes, I just can't do it anymore. I can't continue to do this anymore. And so she comes to this conclusion. She says, no matter how, this is important, no matter how long I'm in therapy, I'm still going to feel guilty if I say no to my father. But if I keep saying yes, I'm going to feel angry. So if I'm going to change, I guess I'll just have to learn to live with some guilt for a while. Again, about the time that I read this book, I realized I thought therapy was going to take away the guilt, make it easy. It didn't. It made it tolerable. I got to see where the guilt was coming from, what was its origin, really the face of my guilt. But when I left therapy, I had to do terrifying things if I was going to do this work. And this is essentially the summation of Dr. Lerner's book. Anger is a tool for change when it challenges us to become less of an expert on others and more of an expert on the self. Anger is a signal that we need to do something different, sometimes right now in the immediate, and definitely over a long period of time in our relationships. It's a signal that we need to work on something different in our lives. And we have to be willing to get out of that room of anger. We have to be willing to walk through the door of guilt, learn to tolerate it. Same with your children. They have to learn to tolerate guilt in order to do the right thing in their lives. All right, I'm happy to take any topic-related questions. I'll go on to some of the upcoming events, and then I'll address any of your questions. We want all of you to attend 6 12-step support groups by the time your child leaves the program. That's our request. You learn about all of this. This is where you get, this is the work. This is what you do, what I talked about tonight. Some combination of Al-Anon, CODA, Families Anonymous. You can also go to NAMI.org to find out about free classes, information, affordable services in your area. Follow us on social media. First of all of these broadcasts are available on the podcast app. If you have an iPhone, just search, go to the podcast app and search Evoke Therapy Programs. If you have an Android device, download the SoundCloud app and then search Evoke Therapy Programs there. If you're on a computer, go to soundcloud.com and search Evoke Therapy Programs. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Evoke Therapy. Facebook, search Evoke Therapy Programs. You can find the Evoke Family Foundation on Facebook. It's an organization of alumni parents that's organized to help people who can't afford treatment, raising money, providing scholarships. The Evoke Therapy blog is a source for information each week. My book, The Journey of the Heroic Parent, is available on Amazon. There are also audio versions there. The next workshop, we have a couple of spots. We have spots available at our next workshop. Talk to your Evoke therapist about combining this visit with a visit to your child, if it's appropriate. The next one is October 13th and 14th at our Southern Utah Entrada location. Contact Melanie at evoketherapy.com for more information or to RSVP. Our next Finding You, this is really going to your family of origin, finding out where all of this is, where all of this lies. If you want to do a deep dive into this, powerful, dynamic deep dive, come to our 4.5-day workshops. Finding You, the next one is October 17th to 21st. Finding You 2 is for people who've been through Finding You. So we have our first one. I'll be running these October 10th through 14th and November 25th through 29th. And then we just opened up our alumni intensive, which are for clients who have been to the program. They have to be 18 years old as of the date listed here. But they could have come as a young adult or an adolescent. And so it's in our Park City cabin. It's not outdoors. They're not going back out to the wilderness, but we thought it'd be neat to provide that for them, for those that want a refresher, want to go into an intense piece of their own work. We had some parents ask when we sent out the invitation, if this was for alumni parents. So we're going to open up, you can go to Finding You. Half of the parents that go there are current or alumni of our program, but we're going to set up one specifically for alumni parents also. Contact us at intensives@evoketherapy.com or go to our website for more information. Parent support groups upcoming. I'll be in Birmingham, Alabama, Friday, October 26th. Chicago, Illinois on Tuesday, November 6th. New York City on November 12th. Philadelphia on November 14th. Contact Melanie at Evoke Therapy for more information. Pursuits trips are family trips, 3 to 14-day trips for young adults or families. If you want to do some work, you can contact our admission staff about that. First parent says, we recently told our 20-year-old son who just began smoking pot after 7 months of sobriety that we would no longer support him with an allowance, just rent and utilities. Instead of saying, okay, I won't smoke pot anymore, he refused to stop, which is what I completely expected, as he has no job or mode of support. He called me several times the next day just to chat, or asked me for boxing lessons or a doctor's appointment for his acne, providing support for basic medical needs. What is this all about? I don't know for sure. It could be about him wanting to maintain some kind of connection with you, hoping to soften you up. It might be, on the positive side, it might be that he's free. Now you're not holding something over his head, and he can just have a relationship with you, right? My mother can't hold anything over my head, so I can just have a relationship with her. So if I were being skeptical, I would say it's to kind of find a way back in. If I were being optimistic, I would say maybe you can just have a relationship with him that's adult to adult, since you don't get to dictate what he does anymore. What tips or advice can you provide to prevent reacting towards others in a negative way instead of enabling a more positive choice or behavior in the moment when anger is felt? It's a lot of a great book, and I did a broadcast on it, is a book called Nonviolent Communication. A lot of it's about communication. I came into in-service just this week, and I was frustrated with something that I saw in some of what I saw. And so I made an all or nothing statement to open up. And one of my therapists came up to me afterwards and he said, hey, I want to give you feedback. When you came in, you used the word never in describing something. And I know, he said, I know you value language and its importance. So I just want to give you feedback that maybe that wasn't the best way to start. And I thought about that. I thought he's right. I did say that, and I do believe in language. I do value language. And I thought to myself, what was happening? What would I have said if I could do a do-over? And what I would have said was, I'm frustrated because I'm seeing something sometimes that I don't like. But I was trying not to be frustrated. I was trying not to feel, and so it leaked all over the place. So my answer to you is do the best you can. Read or listen to the broadcast on nonviolent communication or our communication model. Share your feelings, but not to get the other person to change, but just to own them. Own it. This is where it's coming from. It's mine. You don't have to do anything about it, but this is where it's coming from. And then assert yourself. And be kind to yourself if you make a mistake. And if you provoke a reaction, look at how you might have contributed to it, but it's not necessarily about you. The other thought that I had is, he was right, but that, it's also the job of the listener just to hear the non-I feel statement, the non-assertive statement. And in my moments where I have great capacity, you could say just about anything, any way to me. In the moments where my capacity is waning or very limited, you have to say it just perfectly right, or I will nail you to the wall on it. So my reaction to you asserting yourself, expressing yourself, isn't necessarily about you. You can ask yourself a question, it's not necessarily about you. What tips or advice can you provide? Oh, that's the one I already read. I have a comment. I've become leery of anger because it is usually because I have misunderstood something or just not thought it through. Sometimes that could be the case. Somebody asked the question, where will you be speaking in Birmingham? If you'll email, I don't know right now off the top of my head, and I'll add it to the next slide, but email Melanie at evoketherapy.com and she can tell you. I have another question that says, if we don't share with our children how their behavior impacts us, for example, when you're out past your agreed upon curfew, I worry that something may have happened. How will they learn to see past themselves and their own gratification? Boundaries. They'll figure it out. I used to do this thing with the kids where we'd be hiking together, and we'd walk past a piece of garbage. And I usually walked in the back of the group because I was talking to a student and having a session and wanted some distance, and so I'd be last on the trail. And so I would call all the group back. So it would take a while. They'd all come back. I would stand next to the garbage because it's our expectation that we clean up garbage as we go. And I would just say, would somebody pick up the garbage? And they'd all look at me funny, and one of them would pick up the garbage. I didn't have to give a lecture. Didn't have to teach them anything. Children learn through boundaries. They learn when we show up as a self. They learn when we assert ourselves. But we don't want our children to do it because it makes us feel a certain way. Because if we do that, it wires them to believe that what other people think about them is about them. And when other people feel something good, they've done well. And whenever somebody feels something, negative or sad, they've done poorly. And we know that's not the case. That's where we get trapped as, we're doing that to our children. We're measuring how we do by how they feel. We're held hostage by that because of our own upbringing. There's a saying in Al-Anon that says, what you think about me is none of my business. We have to let go. We can be informed by it. We can ask questions about ourselves, but ultimately we have to let go of what other people think and how they see us in order to grow up and to become a self. What I say isn't necessarily angry, but my tone of voice or facial expression is. Obviously, I'm angry, but I really have a difficult time changing this. Any suggestions on how to be more self-aware of this? Yeah, me too. Own it. I said it to my staff the other day. I said, I know my energy isn't helping. I said it to my children all the time. I know when I get really upset and I leak all over the place, it's not welcoming. People aren't there to say, "Oh, I'm so glad you're sharing with us what's going on," right? It's just you just own it, just wear it, acknowledge it, empathize with how hard you are to deal with sometimes. Say it's yours and not theirs. That's the key. This is mine. You don't have to do anything about it. When a child told me the other week that his goal was to make his parents proud, I said to him, "That's not your job to make them proud." And he looked up at me and he said, "Nobody thinks that way." Right? These kids essentially believe that it's their job to make you happy, and it's not. It's your job to make you happy. It's their job to figure out their lives. And that's plenty hard for them, as we see. I have been angry about the lack of communication with and from my son. He is 8 months out of his Evoke experience and is still out of state. Can I just say that I would like more communication? Of course you can ask for it. You can request it. I don't know the circumstances, obviously, because I don't know the entire situation between you and your son. But I would start a conversation with yourself, just with yourself, and with him about why doesn't he communicate? Is there something I'm doing that makes you feel unsafe? When you talk, do I smother you? When you talk, do I talk you out of your feelings? When you talk, do I beat you over the head with it? When you talk, do I get anxious? And therefore I'm not safe to talk to, right? I would explore that dynamic with yourself and with him. I would identify, if you can, without his help, 3 or 4 reasons why it would be hard to talk to you. Why it would be hard to be your child? And put those out there. See if any of those land. In the end, you may have a need for him to talk to you, and he may not have a need to talk to you. So you can consider that too. Maybe that's your need, not his. That happens for all of us all the time. I know the transition back home is often bumpy. Is there a time frame that you generally see for this time of the journey? I've heard some people say 1 to 2 years. I'm finding this period particularly stressful as our son has been home for 4 months and we're trying to see how we fit. Well, there's research, and I could refer you to our research page where we talk about the timeline. You know, somebody asked me the other day, they found out that I'd sent my son through the program. My second son went through a wilderness experience this summer also. But speaking of my first son, they asked me, did it work? And I said, it's not so black and white. Like it changed our trajectory. It built a bridge between us. It made me aware of new things about my parenting that I didn't know and wouldn't have found out without it. It gave him a tool set, some insight. It set a new baseline. There's all these different ways that it changed. And, now my son, 25 years old, in graduate school, happy, absolutely thriving in his life in most every way, valuing that time back when he was 13 and 14 in wilderness for sure. You might say, in a very binary way, many years later, it worked or contributed, but it was more just about, it's just different. It's just more tools. I try not to think of it. When I think about it with families and family therapy, I don't think about it as work, not work, back to where. It's just a shift. It's just getting things unstuck. It hopefully changes each side of the equation. And even if I point you to our research page that talks about the timing, you might not fit into that part of the bell curve. It might be different. So what I would say is look at yourself, look at your son, look at the relationship, look at it as just an opportunity to now use some of the work, see where it can go. And try, this is hard, but try not to think of things as pass and fail, good or bad, worked or didn't work. Well, thanks, folks. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for the questions. Next week, I'm going to be talking about, this is really, for me, a really important one. I'm going to be talking about the balance of self and parenting, right? I think so many people, when they hear what I talk about, they hear like, don't take care of yourself, or, be there for the child, sacrifice everything, be selfless, be a container. And I'm going to talk about how it's okay for you to show up, and how when you do that, you require your child to develop empathy for living with another, right? Recognizing another. So I'm really looking forward to that based on some of the work that I'm experiencing and watching now that I'm back in the field. Thanks for joining us. Thank you on behalf of your child for being willing to look at this work, to do this work. And I hope these points of contact are helpful. I'll talk to you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.